Greetings and welcome to the Saco School Board meeting for Wednesday, November 8th, 2023. Call this meeting to order at 7 p.m. Let the record reflect that all school board members are present with the exception of School Board Member Truman, who has been excused. With that, we'd like to invite you all to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you very much. Item 3 is approval of the school board meeting minutes dated October 25th, 2023. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Mr. Mayor,
School Board Member LaFortune.
I move we approve the school board meeting minutes dated October 25th, 2023.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by School Board Member Preble. Any discussion? Roll call to approve the minutes. School Board Member Archie.
Yes.
School Board Member Preble.
Yes.
School Board Member Richard.
Abstain.
School Board Member LaFortune.
Yes.
School Board Member Gale.
Yes.
And School Board Member Johnston.
Yes.
5-0 with one abstention. That brings us to item 4. Any adjustments to the agenda this evening? Seeing no adjustments, moving on. There's no correspondence under item 5. That brings us to item 6, a public comment section of the agenda. If there's any member of the public that would like to speak to the school board, please come forward and be heard. With nobody seeking recognition, moving on from the public session to item 7, Superintendent's report. Superintendent Ray.
All right, good evening, everybody. Several items to report out or informational matters. Just for everybody's reference, we are hoping that on Friday, the actual bleachers will get on a delivery truck and be delivered here over the next week. If that occurs and they're actually an invoice that they're shipped, we will then proceed to dismantle the old bleachers on the 16th and 17th with installation during the week of November 27th. So that will be done. The new scoreboard that was donated by the St. Louis Alumni Association has been installed. We'll be waiting for signage on that, and we will plan a dedication date at hopefully a basketball game once bleachers are also in, and we're happy with all of the work that has been done. Reminder to parents of middle school students that November 15th at 7 p.m. There will be the ski club meeting. That's usually a highly involved meeting, as people want to make sure they're on that list. If there's any people here that ski or want to volunteer to drive a van or a bus or tow a trailer, we are looking for volunteers. It's a great event for our kids. On November 1st, you may have seen on the news, we had the dedication of our outdoor learning space at Burns School. Thank you to Project Green Space, Jim Gudbout, Plumbing and Heating, and the Rotary Club for all of the work they did on that, and to Holly and Suzanne for their work on writing and receiving the grant. Teachers and principals have started that budget process, and they're due on December 20th. Always seems early every year when you say that, but gives us some time to really examine those over the next couple of months. One of the things that you may have read about that's really an interesting piece is that through the budget process in Augusta this last year, there was money that was allocated to SAUs, and the bill from the representative in Kennebunkport stated that it would be $750 per homeless student in an effort to make sure that families had access to funds that schools would hold on to help with items that matched up with McKinney-Vento. When the allocation was actually given to school departments, larger school departments only received $311 per student out of that. And what's really challenging is that there has not been clear guidance about how to disperse those funds. And we're not typically general assistance. And so we're really kind of trying to work with the DOE to say, we need to all get on the same page as school departments so that one school department isn't doing and offering assistance in one way and one in another way. So that money's on hold a little bit right now until we work through some of those processes to make sure that there's some consistency around the state. Winter weather could be on our doorsteps as soon as tomorrow morning. So make sure if you're listening at home that there's all of those avenues that we communicate. I do like our new system for calling emergencies is so much quicker than the other one. But you know, even as early as tomorrow, we could be dealing with challenges with weather. So make sure that your email addresses, text messages, all of your sign-up things are working and that you communicated those with the schools. And many times people change cell phone numbers or email addresses, and that doesn't get into our system. So it's important for that. You can always look on television, Twitter, Facebook. We try to cover all the social media applications. In a collaboration with Youthful Maine and with our not Burns School, Fairfield and SMS greenhouses, we're going to be working on some ability for Youthful Maine to grow and produce some of the foods on site, which is something new that we're working with to try to make sure that those are utilized a little bit more. For anybody in Saco, it looks like on December 15th, it will be kind of Saco night at the Maine Celtics. I know our schools are promoting that piece. So that's an exciting event. And then finally, I really want to give a thank you to some of our city crews from police, fire, public works, codes, rec departments. Really have developed strong working relationships with those directors in those positions and those departments to help us on a lot of different things. You know, whether it's, I tend to work with Chief Clements quite a bit and communicate with him often about school safety issues or with, you know, the fire department or the codes department on housing and residents and some of the questions we have for buildings, or, you know, with Ryan at the rec department of sharing gym space and fields. And Patrick at Public Works, who is a great resource for us, especially with this traffic study and some of the other things. Just a really great relationship we have with those. And I want to thank them for the support that they provide to the school department, because in some of the situations that we deal with, it's great to know that you can reach out to those resources, pick up the phone, have a great conversation, and they're all problem solvers. And that's what's great about working with them. So thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Ray. Any questions on Superintendent Ray's report? School Board Member Gale.
Not necessarily a question on any of the items in the report, but I guess I just wanted to thank you for all the communications with the events in Lewiston, and I think everybody was very well, you communicated very well with everyone in the public. One of the questions I had now, kind of looking back on that, I guess two questions. One, how did, and you had mentioned the collaboration with city staff on everything, but just now we've had a little bit of time reflecting back, is there anything that we could do better in terms of those partnerships? It seemed just from the outside that everything worked really well, and again, the communication was excellent. And then the second question I had was one of the calls, the automated calls that I received had an Arkansas number associated with it. And so initially it felt like it was spam. And just in the events and everything that was happening, frankly, I didn't listen to it. I saw that the voicemail was there, but I didn't really pay any attention because I get tons of spam from Arkansas, California, you know, wherever. Is there any way that we could have that be a 207 area code in the future, and kind of what that process looks like. But thank you again for all your hard work on that.
So let me answer the questions in reverse order. The phone number situation is already fixed. That will be I believe it will come from what would be our central office number. So it will be 6400 or whatever that number. I don't know, there's too many numbers out there, but 4505. But it will come from that central office number, and that is just something, because I got that same Arkansas number when I received my own, or the own message from my kids, and we know, like, oh, that's something that has to be done. You know, the second piece, Will, I appreciate your thanks, but I also want to make sure that people recognize that these are a major team effort. And the work that Chris and Mandy and Meg and Shelley and Karen and the principals and Jen Partridge, we have I think we have a pretty good system down of each knowing what our roles are in those, and who's a writer, and I tend to be the phone person, and who's working the phones, and knowing that, again, I believe it was a Wednesday night that we came home from a school committee meeting, and, you know, I was just, we had the late meeting here, and I was eating supper, and teams texting each other, and my wife is saying, "You just got home, can you put the phone down?" And I was like, nope, not right now. But knowing that when I got up from the table, I was able to immediately call the police chiefs in both communities, and they pick up the phone, and we communicate and text about the knowledge that we have, because one of the real challenges in that is that there is so much different information coming at you from many different areas. You know, I do think that one of the things that we might be able to improve upon in the future is just thinking about what that communication chain is and how we can keep things updated on a regular basis, from whether that's my communication with boards, or making sure that, you know, that night I was able to text city managers that schools would be closed, having the conversation with Headmaster Menard at Thornton Academy about what's going on here and how we work together. I think superintendents and heads of schools do a good job sharing information and sharing resources that we have. But one of the things that we will place as a recommendation is I think it's hard in our capacity that, you know, when we have those relationships, we rely on those, but from a state level in the school safety, it's really tough to get on the same page. And as superintendent of schools, and why I think we do so well with roles, is that, you know, when a situation like that happens, we're at a phone that just vibrates constantly. Did you see this Twitter? Have you read this piece? Are you watching this? Do you know those? And it's how I think we've done a pretty good job trying to slow down the process and make sure what we communicate is factual, and then knowing that our communities will have a reaction to certain media pieces that we have to try to deal with. So, you know, I think every one of those incidents that we deal with, whether it's that or COVID or bus situation or whatever, we try to review those to think about how can we be more efficient, more effective, and put out a message that gets to the facts and make sure we don't add to any of the challenges that exist. And I think that when we get to the point when we talk about letter E and the school calendar adjustment that I'm recommending, you know, I'm someone who does not like to give up any days of school, but we also dealt with a situation that the state and communities have never dealt with before. And so we have to think about what we do this time, what we do next time, and how we improve on that. So I appreciate the comments.
Any further discussion points on this item? Moving forward from Superintendent's report to item 8, Chairwoman Preble, anything to report in the chair's report?
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to item 9. There are no staff reports in the agenda this evening. Brings us to item 10, and that is the board subcommittee minutes. The Policy and Personnel Committee met today at 5:30 p.m. Finance and Infrastructure Committee meets on December 13th at 4:30 p.m., and the Curriculum Committee meets on November 27th, 2023 at 4:30 p.m. That concludes the board's subcommittee minutes report. Item 11 is old business. There is no old business on the agenda tonight, so that moves us to item 12, new business. And the first up is item A, new hires. School board members, in your packet, you received a memorandum regarding new hires with, I believe, some requiring action and some requiring no action. At this time, I'll entertain a motion for the new hires. School Board Member Richard.
I move we approve the stipend nomination of Nicole Walton and issue a stipend contract for the 2023-2024 school year.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by School Board Member Preble. Any discussion? Roll call vote. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Richard?
Yes.
School Board Member LaFortune?
Yes.
School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
And School Board Member Johnston?
yes,
Motion passes 6-0. Brings us to item B, resignations. Again, in your packet, you were provided a memorandum requiring some action and requiring no action. So at this time, I'll entertain a motion on the actionable items.
Mr.
Board
Mayor,
Member Richard.
I move we accept the resignation of Sandra Titcomb, District BCBA, effective December 7th, 2023.
Second.
Motion's been made by School Board Member Richard, second by School Board Member Preble. Any discussion on the resignation?
Mr. Mayor,
School Board Member Gale.
just a quick question. What, that title, District BCBA, what is that and what's that function?
So BCBA, and I'm going to get this wrong, is Board Certified Behavior Analysis. I got it right? Analyst. So I was pretty close. That works in the special education department. And a lot of their role is working with developing programs and plans for children with disabilities and/or behaviors, and helping teachers work through the data to develop those programs for kids.
Gotcha, thank you. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I
Yeah.
just hadn't seen that title before us, so, thank you.
And just another piece, just to jump in that, when you see the resignations and you see a position number that you've been seeing recently, what we're really trying to do is, instead of the historical piece of tying a position to a person's last name and then saying, oh, well, Jeff replaced Jeremy and then Jen replaced Jeremy, really trying to number things and code things so that we can have a better tracking system for that. So that's just all that means.
Any further discussion on this item? A roll call vote. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Richard?
Yes.
School Board Member LaFortune?
Yes.
School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
And School Board Member Johnston?
yes,
Motion passes 6-0. That brings us to item C, and that is a school construction update. Superintendent Ray.
Okay, school construction update. Big Works has been around the traffic permit. In the last week, we met with Patrick Fox because it looks like we have an intersection design finally for Route 1 and was it the road into the business park. From that piece, we are looking at all abutters. Meg and I will be writing letters to any of the abutters and going to visit them so that we can start taking questions or concerns. It does not look like there'd be any challenges at this point with property acquisition, as that wouldn't be needed. But certainly, there may be some requests for kind of temporary grading rights to make sure that you're not leaving a hump when you put a sidewalk in, those types of things. That's the next step in the process. It's also kind of a little bit of a chicken and the egg process as we work with the Department of Education and Transportation of saying, well, you need to have this in order for us to move forward, where I find it difficult to tell somebody what you might need or ask of them without knowing exactly what that would be. And I feel pretty strongly that we shouldn't promise one thing and then ask for another through a process. And so we're going back and forth. We are still hoping to push for site approval prior to the new year, which may mean that that date is, we said, December 29th. Maybe the date that we make it. But we are still pushing hard on that, and hopefully we'll be, this is, again, all about traffic right now.
Thank you. Any questions from the school board? School Board Member Gale.
I guess, so are we still on track? I think last time the goal was to get to DOE on the December 13th. Are we on track for that? Or we're going to?
No, we're probably now on to, our next target date is December 29th.
Is the 20, okay,
That's what we're hoping.
gotcha, okay, all right. Sorry, I missed, okay, thank you.
Any further discussion on this item? Moving on to item D, which is an enrollment update from Superintendent Ray.
And there's a memo in your packet, and really it was the enrollment count of 2 students that when the timelines changed, it affected the enrollment by 2 students. I just wanted to update that in memo form.
Any questions on the updated enrollment data? With no questions, moving on to item E, and this was alluded to by Superintendent Ray, the memorandum in your packet with a school calendar adjustment request. Superintendent Ray.
So part of the procedure for making a request and a change in the calendar is working with the school committee and the Commissioner of Education as outlined in the letter. I think that for the days that we canceled school, and as we move into the wintertime, knowing that snow and other cancellations, plus the impact that it had on staff and hourly employees, I feel strongly that we should request a waiver for those 2 days. Many of the school departments in our surrounding areas in southern Maine are going through the same process. I do not take lightly the waiving of days, because I believe that in-person attendance is something that's very important, but I also think that we were dealing with a situation that was new to us, and in this situation, it warrants that consideration.
So the waiver request is basically making it so that you don't have to make up those days, which is what you would do in a normal snowstorm situation.
Correct.
Any questions on the memorandum from Superintendent Ray regarding waiving the 2 days? School Board Member Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question, I think, is around the time frame of when we might get some response to your question, Mr. Superintendent.
My understanding is that the department has been moving very quickly in responding to these.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion on this item? School Board Member Gale.
I guess, you kind of talked a little bit, you touched on the rationale, I guess, for canceling these 2 days. Is there, I mean, do we have anything in policy, or how do we make the determination of cancellation versus treating it as if it's a snow day? Is that subjective based on events and up to you, or I guess kind of how did we make this call to cancel?
Well, again, I think we look at, you take, all situations have different responses that could occur. And in this situation, in order to request a waiver, it is a school committee has to agree with it, and the commissioner has to approve. When we look at what are some of the alternatives when not requesting this as we head into our winter time, knowing that we're down 2 days already out of 5. We have hourly employees who possibly would have missed or had disrupted pay schedules on those 2 days. And then if we look at a situation like last year where we had over 5 snow days and we were adding an hour to the end of some days in order to make them up, I'm not sure that that's always the best choice. Some years it is. Or extending it into the summertime. I think that that's what leads, looking at all of those factors, that leads me to making the recommendation to you that in this situation, we waive those 2 days. You know, while some may question what led us to make the cancellation on those days, dealing with a very new situation and the idea that maybe a building in Saco was part of the threat, or at least that's how that was reported. And then knowing that on the Friday, on the next day, when, you know, we were lying in bed that night watching the news and we thought that a house was surrounded, we might have had a very different response than when we saw all of the vehicles pulling out of there and nothing had changed. And so I think in this situation, that is why I'm here, is that I believe the circumstances warrant all of those considerations for our student, staff, and others going into a unpredictable winter that could start as early as tomorrow morning.
I guess just following up on that, on the hourly employees, how does this affect them?
Make sure that their paychecks are consistent over the next couple of, over the last pay period. Because when we budget for an hourly employee, we budget on a number of days in a school year. And I made that decision right out of the gate that we would pay employees for those days missed. If we don't, we need to be prepared to budget and make adjustments to pick up 2 days of additional pay for hourly staff to meet the contractual obligations for the number of days that they had worked. I felt that at this point in time, based off the situation, knowing the economy that we live in, that I didn't want people going without a couple of days of pay.
Thank you.
School Board Member Archie.
So just to reiterate a little, if we pass the waiver, and the goal is to get back to 5 snow days, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Superintendent Ray, you are asking the school board to take a vote on this evening.
Yes, they need to take a vote on the 2 parts of the process: school committee approval and commissioner approval.
Thank you. School Board Member LaFortune?
So just to follow up on School Board Member Archie's question, we make a motion to say that we want to request this waiver. It goes to the commissioner, and if the commissioner approves, then we are back to 5, still having 5 days. If not, then we're in a situation where we treat it just like a snow day. Okay.
That is correct.
To 3.
That is correct.
Any further discussion on this item? With no further discussion, I'll entertain a motion. School Board Member Johnston?
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve the school calendar adjustment request that the superintendent has written and will be sending to the Commissioner of Education.
Motion's been made by School Board Member Johnston. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by School Board Member LaFortune. Any further discussion? Roll call to School Board Member Archie.
Yes.
School Board Member Preble.
Yes.
School Board Member Richard.
Yes.
School Board Member LaFortune.
Yes.
School Board Member Gale.
Yes.
And School Board Member Johnston.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0 to approve the school calendar adjustment request. That brings us to item F, Title In, next steps. Superintendent Ray.
All right, last meeting, we talked about Tuttle Inn and some of the next steps, and I had provided the amended lease, and there was some asked to see if we could dig out the original lease, which we were able to do, and that's in the packet. At our Finance Committee meeting, Finance and Infrastructure Committee meeting last week, we started to talk about what might be some possible options throughout the community. We identified, I believe it was 18 or 21 spaces, Meg, to think about. That is nothing more than to examine. We felt that it was important that in the examining of the brainstorm 21 spaces, that we develop a matrix, much like we did for land and new school projects, so that it was very clear how we would evaluate one space over another space, and develop that matrix of things like number of classrooms, transportation access, ADA compliance, classroom size, bathroom access, school safety features, proximity to public services, proximity to other schools, playground, outdoor space, access to lunch and school nutrition. That's not an inclusive list. There could be others added, but to know that when space X was looked at, that would be how it would be rated. When space Y was looked at, we would use those same factors. Additionally, the Finance Committee, I promised them to look at kind of a one-year cost of the last year in operations. What would we be putting into next year's budget, which we will be in that space next year, but to anticipate what the operational, non-academic, non-positional costs are. And we've outlined that in the memo, that when you look at an operational expense from lease to contracted services to sewer, water, copiers, telephones, those types of things, that number is around $400,000. Non-positional. And so we wanted to make sure that was on the table so that when we had evaluations and other items that we were bringing up to say, hey, this could be an option and this could be an option, we'd know what the basis of our financial obligation operationally would be prior to making any new arrangements. Be happy to answer as many questions as I can.
Any questions regarding this informational memorandum on the lease and potential options? School Board Member LaFortune.
I don't have a question per se, but I do have a couple of observations. So first off, the only one that I've, and probably most of the board has ever seen, is the revised amended one. Thank you for finding the original. And there's some, I guess, enlightening things in the combination of the two when you put them together. So one of the things that stood right out immediately when I was looking at this was the term runs in the original through the end of June of the final year. In the revised one, it ends at the end of May, which is not the completed end of the school year. So if we were to get to that point, we're kind of in a bind anyway, because we have a school year that's not gone to the end and a need to leave the building. And so one of the things that we were talking about amongst ourselves in the Finance Committee meeting this past week was, well, you know, is it possible maybe to just stay for an extra month? And one of the other things that's in this, which is section 31, is the holdover clause, which says that, yes, you certainly can stay, but if you do that, your monthly fee is 200% of what it is right now. So that, just to be aware of, you know, when we start putting together the grid of numbers here, if the assumption is that we're going to go to the end of the school year and add a month, there's some additional expense that I don't think anybody really knows about. But there's other, you know, other things in there. But that discrepancy of date was one that really stood out, considering we're talking about a school year, which generally, you know, based on the topic we just had, if there's snow days, is going well into June. So that's all I had, just an observation.
Thank you. Any school board member, Gail?
And following up on that, I guess for those who couldn't make that meeting, and then also just generally for the public, I guess I'm curious the reason for the amendment. So the original agreement, original lease agreement, I think was in May, and then we amended it to what kind of we've seen generally as the Exhibit A, First Amendment, was made in June. And there are interesting amendments that were made to it. I'm curious as to kind of how that process came about. Do we know what those conversations were like that precipitated the need for an amendment on that?
I was not around at that time, so Kevin or Beth or others may have a lot more history than I have on that topic.
I was only around as a spectator at that point. I was not on the board, but looking through the original, which was the one that was first put together, and remembering and probably misremembering some of how that set of meetings around that went, it looks like there was a 10-year term with some extensions that, when you add it all up, you could potentially be into this for 20 years. And I think there was at least at the time, the dollar figures that are tied up in all of that, as well as, it requires not just school board approval to do this, but school board and council. I think there was a lot of apprehension about the original one that resulted in some of these revisions. At least that's how I remember it. But it's, looking at the original with lots of clauses that are sort of alluded to in the amended one, but aren't actually listed, having the original with what those are supposed to be really kind of ties all of it together. And, you can sort of surmise how it went down based on all of that, but I think you probably have to go back to meeting minutes or, recorded meetings from that time period to get the, full scope of what actually occurred.
School board member Gail, to answer that question, to the best of my knowledge, because I was here at that time, the lease that was originally approved had in it some language that the school board could not enact on their own, which was to potentially purchase property. So as a result, the city started discussions with the schools and Tuttle Inn, and as a result of avoiding legal costs and litigation, this amendment was struck between all parties. And that's why you see the years were reduced, the money was reduced, the option for purchase was removed, and any further extension is at the will of the school board and the council to make sure that the council has kind of a say in what space is going to be utilized going forward. And that's how we arrived at this amended document from the previous executed first document.
Thank you. I guess just also want to keep in mind the identification of the 21 sites, and as we evaluate that, I mean, I guess just personally, I'm wondering why, when that list gets whittled down to something that's more actionable, and maybe this is a discussion in executive session of amending the lease yet again to terms that potentially could be more favorable for us on a shorter term basis once there's an alternative. I think that the Tuttle Inn, at least from what I've hear and see, the cost of it is an issue. And yes, there are some other kind of physical issues too, but it seems like it has been working well, and just from my experience with my kids going through it, it seemed to be all right. But I just want to keep that potentially as an option as well, of not going through too much, if there is an option to go back and discuss with them alternative arrangements for a year or 14 months or whatever, if they're agreeable to it as well.
School Board Member Johnston.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your explanation of some of the history about what happened. It was a fairly convoluted situation from the very start, and I will say that I think that the amended contract is more advantageous to the school board and the city of Saco than the original. The original had a very lengthy amount of time involved, and so I think we're in better shape at this point. I do acknowledge that the time frame at the end of the contract is a little bit awkward for us since we're in school beyond the last day of May, but I think we can figure out something on that. I don't know that it would, from my perspective, it would not make sense for us to try to go back and do another amendment to the contract. I think while the facilities itself may be fine, and it may have, from your experience, Will, and others, it may have served a purpose very well, but I think that we need to be looking in the direction of clarifying what our situation actually is. It's sort of sticking with our, I would say, convictions that it's time for us, again, my opinion, it's time for us to figure out what we can do with the potential that we have, excuse me, under our own supervision, which I think we can do and will be less costly than trying to engage in anything further with the situation. And obviously, we are looking forward to a new school. I know it will not be ready by the time that we are up with this current contract, but I think that we can, given the criteria and the real focus on what we could do instead of this, that we will find a way to do it. Thank you.
School Board Member LaFortune.
Yeah, just to follow up on the finance facilities meeting that we had. So the discussion around alternatives was really a brainstorming exercise more than anything concrete, and it was really sort of revisiting what we had done in the past, whether it was around COVID and looking at, well, what would we do if we needed alternative space? And ultimately, we started the discussion, if I remember correctly from the other day, with what did we actually do when we started the program when we had no building to begin with. And so a lot of the initial discussions around what might be available out there really revolved around, well, how did that really work out previously? So that's the origin of the sort of that criteria list, and maybe some brainstorming of, well, what is available for things around that might suit the need for, a classroom space for a short period of time was really around that type of thing. It wasn't any, it wasn't like a list that we had already. It was just sort of like, hey, what about that? What about that? And that's kind of how it went.
School Board Member Archie.
So where we're not required to have the pre-K, is there a set amount of days that they have to go, or could we manage the 31st of May?
Pre-K is allowed to have a reduced number of days.
There's always an option for the school board to re-engage with Toddle Inn, because if you look at the renewal section, 3.2, the renewal term, Toddle Inn can execute the 3-year renewal, but it's subject to city council and school board vote. And if there's, and again, this is kind of negotiation, procedure that we're talking about out loud, and this is not good strategy, but there is an option where you could re-engage with Title I and say, hey, we need X amount of years, and this is the budget that we can fit in. Can you do it? And again, that's for Superintendent Ray and school and the school board to look at, and also the city council to look at as you all embark on where to put the kiddos until the new school is ready. So, you know, again, there's always an opportunity to negotiate. School Board Member LaFortune.
Yeah, I think we also would need to get some legal advice on it, because the way that it's written and the way the clauses are put together, there is, within the confines of this agreement right now, an opportunity to go with an extension of 3 years. There's another clause in there that says that you can stay as long as you want. It just means that if you go beyond this, you're paying twice what you would normally pay for rate. And that is not acceptable from my perspective.
I think that's why you could indicate that you're not going to renew and then just openly outright negotiate a new contract for 3 to 5 years or whatever is necessary based upon your needs. But again, that's going to be up to all you. And, you know, I don't want to belabor that, but we also don't want to talk about negotiation strategy out in the public.
Correct. And I just want to, our role is to provide multiple solutions to consider and what the impacts of those solutions, and those could range from A to Z, as we build that menu of items for school committee, budget process, city council, and community to weigh in on. And that's the work that Meg and I and the team is committed to doing, is to say, here are all these options, but let's also make sure that we're looking at options that meet some of those criteria that are very important to successful school programming.
School Board Member Archie.
I definitely think that it's something we need to look into and weigh our options. And I feel like we are all very committed to this. I know that you had put it through Finance Committee, and I know that we can't all be there. Is there a way that we could kind of do a little revolving door so we all have our own input? Is that possible?
So I think what would be really appropriate for us to do is to first go through some evaluations and provide some solutions so that we can talk about real options, and whether that's in a board workshop, part of our budget process, part of school planning. But again, I think part of that is what's out there. What are we looking at? What are possible solutions to the problem, so that we, as a board, are not talking about hypotheticals, but talking about real things that could happen. Does that make sense? And that could happen. That could happen at a board
So
workshop.
you're thinking more of a workshop then?
Yes.
Okay.
Open to the public here, board workshop. Everybody can come, but let us do some of the work so that we have something to actually talk about that's definitive and real. That seems like an important first step to me. Because even once it's also important to remember that even once you talk about multiple solutions space-wise, whatever those may be, then there are operational challenges, consequences, realities that then need to be put into place, much like saying, you know, how do you bus? How do you serve lunch? How do you do playground? And those options may require very different resources depending what they are. Some may be more extensive, some may be not. So those are some pieces that would be great second steps after saying, hey, maybe these 5 are worth studying more. What's the impact then? You know, right now we know that our current solution, which one of the challenges is young kids get on a bus, some as much as as early as 6:30 in the morning. I hope we can find a solution that's better than that. You know, so a whole lot more to come. And we're like 18 to 20 months ahead of that time, so I feel like we're in good shape.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that there's steps, and I just want to make sure that we all have our fair share of input, because I know we all really care about it.
Any further discussion on this item? Moving on to item G, we will have a NWEA update from Assistant Superintendent Parkhurst.
Thank you. So tonight I am sharing with you some information which may feel a little strange given our usual timeline for sharing assessment data. I am sharing tonight the spring data from last spring, even though those of you with students who have taken the assessment might recall that the assessment administration window for the fall has just closed. A little bit of background just on the assessment. It is a computer-based assessment. In the spring of 2023, though the assessment appeared visually the same to students, the back end of the assessment was quite different. We're used to taking NWEA's MAP growth assessment, which is an adaptive assessment that adjusts several grade levels above and below, depending on a student's response to individual items. The main through-year assessment used a similar question bank as MAP growth, but focused on grade level proficiency. And so it had a much larger portion of questions that were at the student's identified grade level, rather than simply adjusting to the student's correct or incorrect answers and adapting to those answers. The intent of that was to comply with a federal requirement that Maine not just use a norm-referenced assessment, as MAP growth is, but used a proficiency-based assessment, which is what the Maine through-year was. For that reason, it is a little bit complicated to try to compare our spring scores over time. So the snapshot that you see tonight is really just looking at what Maine determined was proficiency, and does not give you a snapshot over the course of history of how Maine students have performed or how Saco students have performed as compared to other districts nearby. The fall data was released to us in its entirety this Monday, and so I look forward to presenting something more similar to what you've seen in terms of a historical context of this data and how students are performing pre and post COVID when we're able to share that data in December. A couple of things that we need to kind of understand about what that means for Saco. Parent reports will come in two different forms as we send them home. The individual student reports for the spring were available to us about 3 weeks ago. We made the decision to hold off on sending those reports until we had the fall assessment data because we felt it was incredibly confusing for families to get a brand new report that they've never seen for an assessment right after their students finished the fall on an assessment that was in the spring without the fall scores. So in the coming weeks, families will receive the parent report that they're used to seeing. It will have the spring score on it and the fall score on it. And right behind that will be a proficiency report that will show not just the student's growth over time, but how Maine determined where that proficiency bar was and whether or not that family's individual child was below those expectations, well below, at expectations, or above expectations. So families can expect to see that traditional report that they're used to seeing for NWEA in addition to a comparison to at, above state expectations for both reading and math. The Maine through year will continue to be administered every spring. So from 2023 moving forward, we should, as long as they continue to use that same assessment, have some ability to compare. And luckily, the fall and winter NWEA scores will still provide us that longitudinal comparison where we can really look at growth over time for both individual students and for grade level or cohort numbers. A couple of things of note in the overall through-year graphs and percent of students meeting expectations or above expectations is what's shown on that graph. Grade 3 is currently the largest percentage in terms of grade level, with students at or above expectations in math. In grades 4 through 8, we have the reading percentages meeting expectations higher than math, and that is historically how that has looked, even though the percentages have been very different based on different assessments. We have generally seen higher achievement in reading than in math overall. The percent of grade 6 students meeting or exceeding was the highest, with just about 70% at or above expectations in both math and reading. When we look grade over grade, it's important to remember that this is just one grade level, so we really can't make generalizations to say, that 8th grade math is a particular problem, as you might think from looking at this data, because we don't know if that's a consistent issue that we see at grade 8, or if that's more of a cohort that has come through with some significant challenges. So though we do see kind of a decline over time or over grade levels in achievement, we have yet to see if that's a pattern or something that would require kind of a curricular review at certain grade levels. And lastly, we see that percentage of students meeting or exceeding reading expectations stayed relatively stable from grades 3 to 7, and that range was 59 to 71%, with a little bit of a bump as we got to the 8th grade level. Our next steps with respect to this data is work with building administrators next week, where we will have an opportunity to look at some of that cohort data and grade level data. A lot of work has already been done at the building level to have teachers see student scores from both spring and now this week from the fall administration, and dig in a little bit more to see how that impacts the interventions that we're providing and the classroom instruction. But our administrators will have the opportunity to do some of that big picture work with us in preparation for presenting that information to the board in December. And we're continuing to work with the Department of Education, as there has been a lot of discussion with the Maine Curriculum Leaders Association and assistant superintendents around the comparability of that data and what the change to the Maine through year means, both going forward and for this individual administration window. I'm happy to answer any other questions about the data presented this evening.
Any questions from the board? School Board Member Gale.
Thank you for providing the information. I guess, and I sent an email earlier today, and I apologize for the short turnaround, and you had replied back with a lot of great insights answering some of my questions. But I just also want to, I think it's important too, for context and people watching or someone looking at this in the public, I guess just at a high level here, I'm still concerned looking at this graph for the spring 2023 results, and how does, you'd mentioned in our next meeting in December, there'll be more comparative data that we can look at historical trends, and this is the first year presentation of this, so we can't go back and look at previous trends. It's still alarming to me that for 8th graders, less than 50% are at or meeting above expectations in math, and regardless if it is a cohort, the fact is and let's just say it is a cohort that there's some issue with. The fact is that we're kind of failing them right now based on this assessment on what I'm seeing. And so I guess I'm still struggling with, what is this telling us? What action do you want the board to take, and the value of this? can you help me with the value of what this 1 year's worth of information is compared to what we're going to see in December?
I think the most valuable information that we have is looking at student growth over time, because if we have students at any level not making a year's growth in a year's time, we have serious concerns. If we have students that are significantly behind, not making more than a year's growth in a year's time, we have concerns. If we have students that are performing above grade level that aren't making a year's growth, we have concerns. I struggle a little bit more with the expectation that every 11-year-old must perform at this exact metric. I'm not saying that I don't find value in grade level expectations or in using those standards to kind of litmus test where students are, but we have kids at all ages that have feet that grow at different rates, and they all learn to drive. We have kids losing teeth at different times, and they all eventually end up with permanent teeth. So am I concerned when I see some of those numbers? Yes. Do I think we can continue to make improvements in that? Yes, but I find the ultimate value in looking at how many students are making the growth that we would expect them to make in a year, and what are we putting in place for students that aren't making that year's worth of growth to ensure that they do that moving forward, or that they have multiple opportunities to access that grade level content as well.
And I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it sounds like, you know, I'm just thinking a pediatrician's chart, the important thing is the growth curve, not necessarily where you're on it, but that you're continuing on that curve. Unfortunately, it seems like this is the measurement that's being used, right? So is there anything that, you know, whatever teachers or any association is doing or saying to say, listen, this isn't all that helpful to make decisions because it's a moment in time and there's lots of caveats to testing and all that. I mean, I guess I'm just a little frustrated about you present, not you, but just generally this testing is presented, the results aren't great, and then there's a bunch of caveats as to why they're not great and it's not a good tool, et cetera, but unfortunately, this is the tool that we're using, right? I mean, to your point about everybody learns at a different pace, I completely agree with you, and can we incorporate more of that type of measurement rather than this? Does that make sense? I guess I'm not.
Yeah, I think the value of the assessment is as valuable as the stock that we put in it. And yes, it's a required assessment. Yes, the results are published. That's why I think it's really important to share that information with the board. Do I think it's the most important indicator of the success of our school system? Absolutely not. I think the most important things that we produce from the students coming out are probably never going to be reflected in assessment numbers for reading and writing, but it's a piece of the picture and a measurement in time. And certainly we will continue to dig into those results to see, are there particular groups of standards that are weak areas? What can we do in our instruction to change that? I think there are some things we can do to kind of help kids get over the hump in certain test-taking aspects and things of that nature, but I don't necessarily find those in alignment with the way that we want those students to perform as citizens in the future. So I think we kind of have to weigh those two objectives and land somewhere in the middle.
And that's just a couple other real quick. So who does this, so you're presenting the data to us, is this going up to the state DOE?
The
And I guess
DOE, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and I guess what do they do if they look at this, if anything?
They give us this information after our students take the assessment, there's a state data dashboard where you can look up any district and you'll see these percentages, both current and historic. They're not publishing the data dashboard for the state yet, I believe until December or January. So this is kind of the window where districts have access to look at their own data, but it's not publicly available. So we don't even really have a sense right now of how did we perform compared to our York County counterparts, because we don't have access to their data yet. We will have an opportunity once that data is made fully public. Does that answer your question?
Yep, and then just lastly, is our benchmark for this, like, what is our benchmark for this, I guess, in this specific test?
Therein lies the million-dollar question. The state sets a benchmark, and we look at the grade level standards. That's what they determine as the benchmark, but in terms of there being a non-moving target, I don't think that exists, unfortunately. I think it is a moving target, and there's not an agreed upon national standard of, or state standard for that matter, of what all students should know and be able to do in terms of one test. I think really the best way for us to look at that is to look at this data, look at our national assessment education, the NAEP, and how Maine is doing with respect to that, and then kind of triangulate that with what we're seeing in our own district and try to make a determination about how well we're doing and continuing to move that bar forward in terms of improving those results over time.
Thank you so much. Sorry for the
No, it's fine.
questions and stream of thought there. Thank you.
School Board Member Archie.
I always love these presentations. You guys do really well with them, and it's refreshing to get your input on it a lot of times. From what I have understood, to help you understand well from my perspective, is there really isn't any weight behind it. They give us a target and it moves. That's what I'm getting out of it. But I guess it will give us a target from what we did last year, correct? And that's how I take this information. And then we can see, is this one grade as they're going up, falling behind from everybody else?
But
I just don't want you to put too much weight behind this one particular graph.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The data presented, regardless of how it was collected, is showing something that's not great.
No, it could be the whole state. We could be right there with the whole state for grade 8,
I agree, but at the same time, we should be higher than 1 out of 2 students meeting that student, in my opinion.
I think it's also important that we don't necessarily know what this is also the first year of it. Our kids took the test on a computer last spring at some point in time. We also have, which will be something that Meg will also present in December, is a very changing demographic. I mean, when you think of some of this occurring last spring, we know that 85 students came new to our community with English not their first language, and as a society, we said computerized test is exactly what they need right now. I mean, the other piece that we have that I think is important is we have a community experience. And as much as this is valuable information about the work that we do in our schools and always trying to do better and to look at, when Meg talks, are we struggling with a particular standard that we can incorporate into a different way of teaching? Having a conversation, is that seat work or is that very relevant work that a kid dives right into? Just like you, who will have, I don't know if your kids have taken this one yet. I've experienced that one. When I get presented with those things, for my own children, I know that's one day, one snapshot. And that might have been the day that we were fighting with my son to get out of bed on the way to school and they didn't make it. That could set that day off. And he's fortunate, whereas some of our kiddos, as we know, might have just been worried about whether they were going to get fed that morning. And so I believe that it is a piece of the puzzle and a data point that we can make decisions on, but there's all these other things as a community we feel really good about, and that our teachers care and our bus drivers care and our community cares, and we provided this, provided that. And then, what are we on, like number 5 test in 6 years that we have no ability to build upon anything. And even after we do this 3 or 4 years, I suspect someone will want us to try something different. And I think that's the frustrating part for educators in the classroom who are working their fingers to the bone to make sure that everyone's kid is reading on grade level, and they're pulling that piece off, and then we as a society sometimes allow a test score or an experience on a computer to drive a narrative when we all care about our kids and what I think we're doing. So I caution us, but at the same time, school departments, districts, states have the requirement to report this stuff out to their boards and those pieces, and it's just a convoluted mess. And I think that if we had our Commissioner of Education here talking to us about this, she would give us even another factor to consider, is how business, testing companies, and textbook companies really have a lot of leverage in what this is all about. And when you sell a program to test kids and then remediate kids afterwards, a lot of money to be made off of stuff.
I see your bait. I'm abstaining from further discussion in public about that.
Any further discussion on this snapshot or data point in time that will most likely change?
Well, I gotta add one more thing that, again, which is interesting. NWEA, who were they just purchased by? Houghton Mifflin, one of the largest textbook companies in software, educational software in America. They now own NWEA, the testing company.
I agree, and I think that's what part of the frustration of this whole thing for me is kind of that very point of what is the point of this? Because you can poke.
They tell us we have to do it.
Right. But this is presented to the public. And so, again, if I'm a member of the public and I look at this graph and I see 8th grade is under 50%, I'm saying, what the hell are we spending all our money on? $10,000 a student, and you can't even, 1 out of 2 can't even read in 8th grade yet, to an 8th grade level? That's all they know based on this chart. And it's frustrating as the school board, as teachers, as the school, to then have the DOE say, well, you got to do this, and then you have all these other back-end issues, which
I want to say our DOE really has fought hard against these pieces. They wanted to talk about growth, which was in the other 2 years when you talked about 87% of your kids making growth. They pushed really hard and advocated hard, as the federal government did not want us to talk about growth. They wanted us to talk about percentiles, proficiencies. What was awesome about NWEA, and I remember it so clearly as a principal, is that when you would get those tests back and it'd be the next day, and a teacher and a principal having great conversation about kids, and that you can learn very quickly that, yes, Jamae, Wendy, and Jeff, who are students in your classroom, are struggling with measurements, and it gave you opportunities and helped guide you to say, hey, I can provide these lessons so that we can deal with measurements. That was awesome about NWEA, or to make sure that kids were selecting books that were at the right level. That was great about NWEA. And superintendents who had that experience as educators and principals and teachers initially said, yes, this is a great metric for us. And then policy comes in and takes over some of those pieces, and it's hard because we don't necessarily know what it's like, hey, it's measuring with a ruler that's not always, is that a foot or it's not consistent.
Any further discussion on this item? Moving on from the NWEA update. Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Parkhurst.
Thank you, Meg.
Thank you.
That brings us to item item H, a second reading of policies. Policy JLCDB, naloxone policy. JLI, procedure for reports of dangerous behavior by students. JLI-E, procedure for reports of dangerous behavior. IHBA, individualized education plans. IHBAA, referral and use of interventions. IHBAA-R, referral administrative procedure. Strike HD/negotiations, replace with HA, negotiations, goals, priority objectives, and policies to be recoded IHBAL, the grievance procedure for persons with disabilities to be recoded as AC-R. Is there a motion to approve the second reading of policies? School Board Member Johnston?
Thank you. Excuse me. I move we approve the second reading of policies JLCDB, JLI, JLI-E, IHBA, IHBAA, IHBAA-R, and to strike policy HD and replace it with policy HA, and to recode policy IHBAL as AC-R.
Motion's been made by School Board Member Johnston. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by School Board Member Preble. Any discussion on this second reading of policies? A roll call vote. School Board Member Archie.
Yes.
School Board Member Preble.
Yes.
School Board Member Richard.
Yes.
School Board Member LaFortune.
Yes.
School Board Member Gale.
Yes.
And School Board Member Johnston.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. That brings us to item 13. There's nothing on the agenda under other information. However, I just wanted to thank the TA students who sat last night in the lobby of the voting booths and raised over $3,000 for the victims' families of the Lewiston mass shooting. So again, thank you to those students and Thornton Academy and everyone that put in the hard work to make that a reality. And thank you for all the generous donations from community members and folks that came out. Also, I would like to congratulate Mayor-elect Jody McPhail, also Chair Preble for your reelection, and also School Board Member Truman on her reelection. I would like to also thank School Board Member LaFortune for your long service to the community. With that, this is my last meeting in this role, so I do want to, one, apologize for the missing of meetings, but due to my job and travel, I was unable to be here. So I do apologize for that. But I also want to thank you all. Well, we didn't always agree, and we won't always agree. That's the purpose of the democracy that we live in. So again, while we may have disagreed, I just want to thank you all for your service, and then also for just putting up with me for the last couple of years. And then thank you to all the administrative staff, and all the staff that go in and put in the hard work every day. So thank you very much. With that, any other information for this evening?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Moving on. There's no executive session this evening under Section 14, so Article 15, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
School Board Member Preble, is there a second?
Second.
School Board Member LaFortune. Any discussion?
Mr. Mayor, yeah, quick discussion on the adjournment before we adjourn. Following up on Artie's, thank you so much for all your service over the last couple of years on the school board, and it's going to miss you, and thank you for, again, thank you for all your service.
Thank you.
I would have to echo everyone. It's been a pleasure, and yes, we haven't always agreed on everything, but I think it's very important that you were here to help us along the way. I appreciate the experience learning how to run a school board meeting. That's been great. So I've learned a lot from you, and we all thank you for being a part of this. So thank you.
It's been my honor and privilege, so thank you very much. With that, roll call to adjourn.
1 second.
Oh, School Board Member LaFortune.
Since this is your last meeting, I don't think it's mine, because I think we have another, correct? Do we now? Oh, we don't. Okay, well, this may be mine as well.
I have a second one in November because of Thanksgiving break, and your inauguration day here, swearing, is
December 4th, Monday, December 4th will be the inauguration of the new mayor, councilors, and school board members.
but we will definitely be inviting you back and Mr. Mayor back, probably early in January.
So with that, since this is my last meeting as well, the one thing that I think really should not go without saying is that this configuration board, and it's unfortunate that Sarah isn't here tonight, is probably my favorite and the most enjoyable group of people that I've worked with on a board, whether that is the RSU, the initial foray into doing our own thing as the Saco School Board, and then the various configurations after that. And it's no offense to any of the other boards that I've been part of, but this group of people has been absolutely fantastic to work with. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I really have felt like every meeting that we have, everyone has really come here with the right mindset, not just to do the right thing for the community, but to also be open-minded enough and thoughtful enough in the way that questions get approached and asked. And I really, you know, as a group, I will miss, you know, working with you guys. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to still be around. But it has been a very long journey. I think this is probably about my 10th year, you know, on and off of doing this, and it's been very challenging at times, but it has always been absolutely rewarding. I really enjoy the subject matter. It's totally different than what I do in my day job. I'm in IT, and you know, I don't deal with such, you know, it's interesting stuff, but I don't deal with things that are so, you know, real, I guess, you know, that affect people in my community the way that things here do. And I have absolutely, you know, really loved the subject matter. I've enjoyed, you know, working with administrators when I've had the opportunity to do that. It's just this, I consider this to be a really fun job, and I think that that is how it's supposed to be when you join a board that's a governance board like this. And so I just want to say thank you, and also thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I know we haven't always agreed, and it's one of those things that it just comes with the territory. It's part of democracy, and that's the way it works. And I have, you know, selfishly, I was somewhat happy when the transition occurred where you presided over the meetings, because a lot of those early meetings that I was doing that were quite challenging. But you know, I cannot say enough, and you know, as far as how much, you know, how proud I am of the Saco School Department and all of the people that are in it to get us to where we are right now. It's, you know, I really feel like I'm going out, you know, on a high note, happy with, you know, the way things are. It's kind of like you know, wow, this is really a good time to step aside and have, you know, go on to the next chapter and you know, have some others rise to the occasion and take the spot. So thank you. I've like I said, I have thoroughly enjoyed working with all of you, and thank you. I'll see you at a future school board meeting, I'm sure.
Thank you, and I would be remiss, I actually missed somebody I would also like to thank. School Board Member-elect Kevin Roach, as he will be taking over in the Ward 4 position. But again, thank you for your service to our community. With that, roll call to adjourn. School Board Member Archie.
Yes.
School Board Member Preble.
Yes.
School Board Member Richard.
Yes.
School Board Member LaFortune.
Yes.
School Board Member Gale.
Yes.
And School Board Member Johnston.
Yes.
The motion passes 6-0 to adjourn at 8:26 PM. Have a great evening, everyone.